Why does nothing feel like enough anymore? Not in a dramatic way, not always in a painful way, not even in a way you can easily explain. Just a quiet feeling underneath everything. A feeling that says something is missing. You wake up, you move through the day, you answer messages, finish tasks, make plans, keep going. And from the outside, maybe everything looks normal, maybe even good. Maybe there is nothing obvious to complain about. But somewhere inside, there is a silence. Not peace, not rest, but a kind of emptiness that has no clear name. It does not always feel like sadness. Sometimes it feels like distance, like you are close to your life, but not fully inside it. Like the days keep passing, but something deeper in you is not being reached. And that is what makes it confusing, because if life is not falling apart, why does it still feel incomplete? If you are moving forward, why does something still feel still? If you are achieving things, why does the satisfaction disappear so quickly? Maybe you thought the emptiness would go away once you reached the next thing, the next goal, the next version of yourself, the next sign that your life was finally becoming enough. But sometimes the next thing arrives, and for a moment you feel something. Relief, excitement, a small wave of meaning. And then it fades, and the same quiet question returns. Is this all? Not because you are ungrateful, not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because the human mind was never meant to live only on achievement, only on distraction, only on comfort, only on the next reward. There is something in us that does not just want pleasure, it wants meaning. Something to carry, something to serve, something to love, something that makes the weight of life feel worth holding. This session is gently inspired by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, not as a summary, not as a lesson to memorize, but as a quiet reflection on the hunger that lives beneath the surface. The hunger, not simply to feel good, but to feel that life is asking something from you. Frankl wrote from a place where comfort was gone, certainty was gone, control was gone, and yet the question of meaning remained. And maybe that is why his work still reaches people. Because even in a world full of comfort, many people feel strangely empty. Not because they have too little, but because they do not know what their life is for. This kind of emptiness does not shout. It whispers while you scroll, while you work, while you laugh, while you lie awake at night. It whispers, there must be more than this. And maybe that whisper is not something to hate. Maybe it is not a sign that your life has failed. Maybe it is a sign that some deeper part of you is still alive, still asking, still refusing to be satisfied by noise alone. Because noise can distract you, pleasure can entertain you, success can lift you for a moment, but meaning does something different. Meaning gives effort a reason. Meaning gives suffering a direction. Meaning gives ordinary days a quiet weight. Without meaning, even comfort can feel empty. Even achievement can feel breathe. Even rest can feel restless. So tonight, we are not going to force meaning. We are not going to pretend that every empty feeling has an easy answer. We are only going to slow down and listen to the part of you that still wants your life to mean something. Because maybe nothing feels enough anymore. Not because life has nothing to offer, but because your deeper self is no longer satisfied with living on the surface. Maybe the emptiness is not the end of meaning. Maybe it is where the search begins. Maybe you thought success would make the emptiness disappear. Maybe you believed that once you became better, more respected, more disciplined, more admired, then life would finally feel full. So you kept reaching one goal, then another, one version of yourself, then another, one small victory, then the next. And for a moment, success works. It gives you energy. It gives you proof. It gives you a reason to believe you are moving. But then the feeling fades. The praise becomes quiet. The achievement becomes normal. The next goal appears, and suddenly you are chasing again. This is one of the quiet traps of modern life. You can keep improving and still feel empty. You can keep becoming more and still feel disconnected from why any of it matters. Because success can answer some questions. It can answer, can I do this? Can I become better? Can I prove myself? Can I be seen? But success does not always answer the deeper question, what is this for? And when that question remains unanswered, even achievement can start to feel strangely hollow. You may reach something you once wanted badly and still feel only a short moment of relief. Not because the goal was worthless, not because you should not care, but because a goal is not the same thing as meaning. A goal gives direction for a while, but meaning gives direction to the person walking. A goal can tell you where to go next, but meaning asks, who are you becoming while you go there? This is why some people look successful from the outside but feel tired inside. Not physically tired, but existentially tired. Tired of proving, tired of chasing, tired of needing the next thing to feel real for a moment. And maybe you know this feeling, the moment after achievement when everyone expects you to feel complete, but inside there is only a quiet emptiness. And you wonder, why am I not happier? Why did this not last? Why do I already need something else? Frankl's work reminds us that a human being does not live deeply by pleasure alone, or success alone, or comfort alone. A person needs meaning, something that reaches beyond the temporary feeling of getting what they wanted. Because pleasure fades, attention fades, praise fades, even success becomes familiar. But meaning can remain even when life is difficult, even when the reward is small, even when no one is watching, even when the path is not impressive to anyone else. Meaning is quieter than success. It does not always shine. It does not always impress people. It does not always look like progress from the outside. Sometimes meaning looks like showing up for someone, being honest when it is difficult, creating something with care, carrying responsibility, choosing not to become bitter, doing one small thing with your whole presence. And maybe that is why success does not always fill the gap, because the gap was never asking to be decorated. It was asking to be understood. You can decorate a life with achievements, with titles, with applause, with images that look meaningful. But if your deeper self does not feel connected to what you are living for, the emptiness remains, quietly, patiently waiting. Not to punish you, not to shame you, but to remind you that you are not only a machine for improvement. You are a person who needs a why. And maybe tonight, you do not need to reject success. You do not need to stop wanting things. You do not need to pretend achievement does not matter. You only need to see that success alone was never meant to carry the whole weight of your soul. Maybe the question is not, how do I achieve more? Maybe the quieter question is, what is worth giving myself to, even when no one applauds? Because when life is only about reaching, you will always need another place to go. But when life begins to mean something, even the ordinary steps can start to feel different. Maybe meaning is not something you find all at once. Maybe it does not arrive as a single answer, a clear sign, a perfect direction, a sudden feeling that explains your whole life. Maybe meaning is quieter than that. Maybe it is noticed slowly in the small places where your attention finally becomes honest. Because many people look for meaning as if it is hidden somewhere far away, in a future life, in a perfect career, in a relationship that fixes everything, in a version of themselves they have not become yet. But meaning often begins much closer than that, in the way you respond to what is already here, in the person who needs your presence, in the responsibility you keep avoiding, in the work that asks for your care, in the pain that asks you not to become cruel. Frankl's idea was not that life gives us one simple meaning that never changes. It was closer to, this life is always asking something from us, and meaning appears in how we answer. Not only with words, but with choices, with attitude, with courage, with love, with the way we carry what we did not choose. This is why meaning is not always exciting. Sometimes it feels like responsibility. Sometimes it feels like patience. Sometimes it feels like staying gentle when life gives you reasons to become hard. And maybe that is why we miss it, because we expect meaning to feel like inspiration. But sometimes meaning feels like quiet duty. Something simple that still matters. Something ordinary that becomes sacred because of the way you give yourself to it. A conversation you do not rush. A promise you keep. A difficult day you move through without betraying yourself. A small act of kindness that no one sees. These things may not look impressive. They may not become a story. They may not receive applause. But they can still carry meaning. Because meaning does not always need an audience. It only needs truth. And maybe part of the emptiness you feel comes from living too far from what feels true. Not completely, not obviously, but quietly. Saying yes when something in you says no. Chasing things you do not truly respect. Performing a version of yourself that keeps you accepted, but not alive. The deeper self notices this, even when you ignore it. It notices when you abandon your values. It notices when you trade meaning for approval. It notices when you keep choosing noise because silence might ask a harder question. And sometimes emptiness is the signal that you have been away from yourself for too long. Not because you are lost forever, but because something in you wants to come back. So perhaps meaning begins not with finding the perfect answer, but with becoming honest about the next answer. What is life asking from you right now? Not someday, not when you are ready, not when everything is clear, but now. Is it asking you to love someone better, to create something real, to take responsibility, to let go of bitterness, to stop running from what you already know. You do not need to answer everything tonight. You do not need to understand your whole life. But maybe you can notice one place where meaning is already calling, quietly, patiently, without force. And maybe if you listen closely, you will see that meaning was not absent. It was simply quieter than the noise you were chasing. Suffering is one of the hardest places to look for meaning. Because when you are hurting, you do not want philosophy. You do not want advice. You do not want someone to turn your pain into a beautiful sentence. You only want it to stop. And that is human pain, is not romantic. Loss is not poetic. While it is happening, loneliness does not feel meaningful when you are inside it. But Frankl's work points towards something quiet and difficult. Not that suffering is good. Not that pain should be wanted. Not that every wound has an easy reason. But that even when suffering cannot be removed, a person may still have one final freedom. The freedom to choose their attitude toward what they carry. Not always perfectly, not always calmly, not without fear, but somehow there remains a space between what happens and how the soul responds. And in that space, meaning can appear. Sometimes meaning appears as courage, sometimes as love, sometimes as endurance, sometimes as the quiet refusal to let pain make you cruel. This does not mean you have to be strong all the time. It does not mean you should hide your grief. It does not mean you should pretend that everything happens for a reason. Some things hurt because they hurt. Some losses do not need explanation. Some nights are simply heavy. But even there, inside the heaviness, there can be a question. Not, why is this happening to me? But, what kind of person will I become while carrying this? That question is not easy, but it is honest. Because life will not always ask you what you want. Sometimes life asks what you will do with what you did not choose. And maybe this is where purpose becomes deeper than pleasure. Pleasure depends on what life gives you. But purpose can remain even when life gives you something you never wanted. Purpose can live in how you care, how you respond, how you keep your heart open, how you protect what is still good inside you. Maybe you cannot control the whole situation. Maybe you cannot undo what happened. Maybe you cannot make life fair tonight. But perhaps you can still choose one small response, one honest action, one gentle word, one refusal to become empty because of what hurt you. Meaning is not always found by escaping suffering. Sometimes it is found by meeting suffering without giving it the final word. And this is not a command to be positive. It is not a pressure to turn pain into growth. It is only an invitation to remember that you are more than what happened to you. You are not only the wound, you are also the one who witnesses it, the one who carries it, the one who can still choose how to hold it. And maybe tonight, if there is something heavy inside you, you do not need to explain it perfectly. You do not need to solve it. You do not need to make it meaningful before you rest. You can simply admit this hurts and still whisper, I am here. I am still here. Sometimes that is enough for one night. Not a full answer, not a final purpose, but a small act of staying with yourself without turning away. And maybe, in time, even this pain will show you something. Not because it was good, but because you chose not to let it take everything good from you. Maybe tonight you do not need all the answers. Maybe you do not need to understand your whole life or solve every emptiness or explain every ache inside you. Maybe tonight you only need to stop fighting the question, because the search for meaning can become heavy when you think you must solve it immediately. When you believe you must know your purpose before you can rest, when every quiet feeling becomes another problem to fix. But meaning does not always arrive because you demand it. Sometimes it appears slowly, through living, through listening, through responsibility, through love, through the way you answer the day in front of you. You may not know where your whole life is going. You may not know why certain things happened. You may not know what the emptiness is asking from you. But you can still be here with the breath, with the body, with the room, with this small moment that does not require a final answer. Because sometimes the mind turns meaning into pressure. It says, find your purpose, fix your life, become someone, make it all make sense. And suddenly, even the search for meaning becomes another way to feel behind, another way to judge yourself, another way to believe you are not enough yet. But quiet mind is not about rushing to toward a perfect answer. It is about slowing down enough to hear what is honest. And honesty is often quieter than ambition, quieter than fear, quieter than comparison, quieter than the voice that says you should already know. Maybe there is something you care about, but you have buried it under noise. Maybe there is someone who needs your presence, but you have been too tired to fully arrive. Maybe there is a responsibility you have been avoiding, not because you are weak, but because it asks you to become more honest. Meaning does not always come as a grand mission. Sometimes it comes as the next true thing, the next kind thing, the next brave thing, the next responsibility you stop running from. And maybe that is enough for tonight. Not the entire map, not the whole future, not a perfect reason for every pain. Just one small place where life is asking you to answer with more truth. Frankl reminds us that life is not only something we question. Life is also something that questions us. And maybe the question tonight is not, what do I get from life? Maybe it is, what is life asking from me now? Not from the version of you who has everything figured out, not from the person you think you should be, but from you as you are, tired, unfinished, still searching, still here. You do not need to become complete tonight. You do not need to turn emptiness into certainty. You do not need to force peace before the mind is ready. You can let the question remain open. You can let the silence breathe. You can let the search continue without carrying it like a punishment. Because sometimes a meaningful life does not begin with a loud answer. Sometimes it begins with a quiet willingness to listen to what hurts, to listen to what matters, to listen to what keeps returning, to listen to the part of you that no longer wants to live on the surface. And if nothing feels enough, maybe it is not because you are empty. Maybe it is because something in you is asking for depth. Not more noise, not more proof, not more distraction, but depth. So for tonight, let the search be gentle. Let the question stay soft. Let the mind rest without needing to finish the meaning of your entire life. You are allowed to not know everything and still keep going. You are allowed to feel unfinished and still be worthy of peace. You are allowed to be searching and still rest. Maybe meaning does not return all at once. Maybe it comes back slowly, quietly, in small moments. You almost miss a conversation that feels honest, a responsibility you stop avoiding, a kindness you choose when no one is watching, a difficult feeling you finally allow yourself to name. Maybe meaning is not always a light that suddenly fills the whole room. Sometimes it is a small candle, just enough to take the next step. And maybe that is all you need tonight. Not the whole path, not the whole answer, not the whole reason for everything that has happened. Just enough light to remember that your life is still asking something from you. Not in a cruel way, not as pressure, not as another demand to become perfect, but as an invitation to return to what matters. Because even when nothing feels enough, there may still be something that matters. Quietly, something you care about beneath the noise. Someone you love beneath the distance. A value you still respect beneath the confusion. A part of yourself that still wants to live honestly. And maybe the emptiness was never asking you to become someone else. Maybe it was asking you to stop abandoning what you already know is true. Not everything meaningful feels exciting. Not everything purposeful feels clear. Not every calling arrives with certainty. Sometimes meaning feels like staying, like listening, like trying again without applause, like choosing tenderness when bitterness would be easier, like carrying pain without letting it turn your heart against life. And if that sounds small, maybe that is because we have been taught to look for meaning only in things that look impressive. But a meaningful life is not always loud. It is not always visible. It is not always understood by other people. Sometimes it is simply the quiet knowledge that you are living closer to what you believe is true. And maybe tonight that is enough. Not because every question is answered. Not because the emptiness is gone forever. Not because life suddenly feels simple. But because you are no longer running from the question. You are listening to it. You are letting it soften you. You are allowing it to point you back toward depth. This is what quiet mind is about. Not escaping the emptiness, not forcing meaning, not turning pain into a performance, but learning to sit with a deeper question without fear, to notice what still matters, to hear what the noise has been covering, to return slowly to yourself. Because maybe nothing feels enough anymore. Not because you're empty, but because something in you is ready for a more honest life. And you do not need to complete that life tonight. You do not need to understand it perfectly. You do not need to explain the whole search before you rest. For now, you can breathe. You can let the question remain open. You can let meaning arrive one honest moment at a time. And if the emptiness whispers again, there must be more than this. Maybe tonight you do not need to silence it. Maybe you only need to answer softly, yes, and I am listening. Quiet the mind, understand yourself.